So the internet, of course, started way before the World Wide Web. And what a lot of us wanted out of this was a library of everything, universal access to all knowledge. Could we make it so that anybody with an internet connection could get any of the published works of humankind? Could you also then make it so that anybody with a good idea could make their idea available? So basically everyone becomes a publisher. This was the original idea in the 1980s, and the World Wide Web really took off in the 1990s.
The new generations just assumed that the internet was inevitable, but the fact is there were a lot of ideas about making an alternative to the internet. Microsoft was not on board with the internet. Microsoft had a different thing called Project Blackbird that was going to be the Microsoft network. And only things that were approved by Microsoft would really be able to flourish on the Microsoft network. And they envisioned it as like outcompeting the internet. France had a whole system called Minitel, which was like the French government's alternative to the internet. And all of those are gone.
It was such an exciting idea that anyone could now be a content creator, that your thoughts, your blogs, your images, your videos could be shared from location to location across this World Wide Web. It was a democratizing of content sharing.
I had been such a fan of the internet and all of its potential to bring information to people and to add new services to our lives. And it was a very exciting time in sort of the mid 2000s as all of, the internet was sort of coming into its maturity. But then I became very, privacy has always been really important to me. And I became very worried as, Facebook began to take off and other social media platforms, later on, a few years down the road, they really seem to have some problems with them.
The early version of the web was very free and open, and it wasn't very efficient. So it was hard to use. You had to be running your own servers and all kinds of other stuff that a regular internet user, in practical terms, can't do. But it was very open. And we lost that in favor of efficiency. And I think early on that trade-off seemed good. We got all of these great apps with these great experiences. And then I think one of the things that we learned over time is that as these companies got bigger and bigger, they started acting more and more like monopolies and started being less and less respectful of their users' interests.
When we think about preservation of information and we think of the World Wide Web, it should start to like, something's really wrong here. In the old days, if you published a book, it went into lots of libraries. So even if one of those libraries burned down, you'd still have the book, right? But in the World Wide Web, we have everything on one centralized web server. So if that web server goes down or changes, then whatever it is that was on it is different.
Increasingly, we have all of these Supreme Court briefs that reference URLs of different websites. But if you go back, most of those URLs, they're not even live URLs anymore. They're just dead links. And I think that's just one example of just countless examples of our history being erased because the internet of today isn't built for the long-term preservation of knowledge.
The decentralized web would make it so that we can go and have reliable cultural institutions and cultural materials that isn't just going to disappear at the whim of one organization or another.
We have this entire thing of the decentralized web, or sometimes I like to say the renaissance of peer-to-peer tools being built now. And maybe under that umbrella, I would put many things. I would put something like DAT, I'd put IPFS, I'd put Scuttlebutt, I'd put Cabal, I'd put most blockchains, most things that call themselves Web3. They're all sort of in some way engaging with trying to build a decentralized internet.
You can build something from the start that has resilience of content over time in its design. And I think the reverberations of that over time, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, of the web will be really, really apparent. This moment in time, I think, will be looked back at as the point at which, like, maybe the rot started to slow a little bit.
We look historically at how we've conceptualized free speech in democratic societies, especially in the United States, and we really talked about the value of people being engaged in speech in public spaces. But when we think about the internet, at least the modern internet is often controlled by, again, a handful of technology companies. And then the idea of a public space is really changed, right? So, the First Amendment is all about preventing the government from censoring your speech. But often the censorship that happens online isn't coming from the government, though sometimes it is, but often it's coming from companies, from tech companies. The hosts for most of the cultural conversations we're having today are not in any way incentivized to create a platform where we can have robust, deep, nuanced conversations about the future of our society.
People who don't think about the technology that they're using, like the famous Douglas Rushkoff quote, you're either programming your entertainment, choosing your entertainment, you don't have to be a coder, or you're being programmed. So when you just go to Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and you just open it up and you let the algorithm decide, you're stuck. Like you're stuck with what they serve you. You're stuck with the messaging and the medium that they want to present to you.
Because Twitter is centralized, it means the users don't have the autonomy to change how they're using it. They just have to take Twitter's choices or be locked out forever. And so I think that is really where I want to see decentralized technology going, is creating systems that are really accountable to and under control of the communities and populations using them, rather than under the control of, a set of shareholders in a skyscraper somewhere who are just controlling an optimization problem, where the optimal goal is just to produce more money, regardless of what the impacts on the community, what the impacts on society are.
There are a lot of proposals out there for addressing internet companies being centralized and the problems with centralization. And a lot of those involve heavy regulation. But in my view, these proposals really presuppose that the internet needs to be centralized. And I don't think that's the case. I think there are some really interesting things to be said about not focusing on the regulatory perspective, but focusing instead on what can happen if you decentralize the web.
If we recognize those original visions of the internet and this original idea of a more decentralized place where the power is not held by any one player or a few large centralized players, but really push that power out to the ends, it might solve a bunch of those potential problems. And so I just look at it purely from a practical standpoint in terms of what is best for the internet, and beyond that, society. If you were to take the internet as a tool for a good society.
The pressures from censorship and control and the ability to extract value and exploit people using that control gives rise to increased demand and increased value for a freer alternative. And so I think that's why there's going to be this continuous cycle of evolution, and hopefully the decentralized web will provide the next cycle of that, just like the internet did 30 years ago.
I think there's a lot of upside for decentralized services to be able to upkeep really important information from a human rights standpoint, from citizen knowing what is happening, from a transparency standpoint, with local journalists, with reporters, that will allow for authoritarian governments not to just shut down the internet when there is content that they don't want to see. So I think there's a lot of potential for for good that comes out of the internet being able to be more accessible to many, not just a rare few.
The way I think about it is it's taken 2 decades for the internet to kind of get out of beta. And now we are able to really, from a foundational level, because the internet is based on peer-to-peer technology, embrace that. And it's taken this long for us, I think, as humans, to be able to organize and understand what the technology really enables.